28 men are trapped in Antarctica. No radio, no rescue plan, no clear way home. Their ship lies crushed by ice, surrounded by a frozen world so empty that no one even knows where to look. By every reasonable guess, this should have become a story of disappearance. But it does not. Every single man survives. What happens between those two moments becomes. This is the tale of Ernest Shackleton, a man who failed to complete his great mission, yet achieved something even more impossible. He brought every man home. To understand why this disaster mattered so deeply, we must go back to the dream that carried these men south. In 1914, Antarctica was not merely an empty white place at the bottom of the world. It was the last. The North Pole had already entered the headlines, and the South Pole had been reached. But one challenge remained: to cross Antarctica from coast to coast. For Shackleton, this was not just a journey across ice. It was a chance to step into the final chapter of an age when explorers were treated like heroes. The ship that carried him and his crew was called Endurance. At first, that name felt perfect, strong, brave. Inside its wooden walls, the men had food, shelter, tools, and hope. The ship was more than just a vessel. It was their home, their protection, their last connection to the world they had left behind. But Antarctica did not need to fight them with noise or violence. It only had to wait. Slowly, at first, it seemed like a delay. The men hoped the ice would loosen. They prayed the ship would move again. They wished that patience would save the expedition. But day by day, the ice grew stronger. It pressed against the ship, closing around the hull, turning the sea into a prison. The Endurance stopped moving. The dream of crossing Antarctica froze. No longer were they explorers sailing toward glory. They were prisoners of the ice. But being trapped was only the beginning. The ice was not finished with them yet. Day after day, the pressure around the Endurance grew heavier, as if the frozen sea had wrapped its hands around the ship. At first, the men could still believe the ship might hold. It had carried them through violent waters, protected them from wind, darkness, and fear. But now, the danger was different. There was no enemy to face, no wave to fight, no storm to outrun. Only pressure, quiet and patient. The wood began to groan. Beams bent. Cracks opened where solid walls had once made the men. Imagine hearing your only shelter break beneath you. Not in one terrible moment, but slowly, hour after hour, until hope itself began to sound like splintering wood. The Endurance did not die like a ship in battle. It died in silence, crushed by a world too cold to care. For Shackleton, in that frozen silence, he quietly abandoned the dream he had pursued for years. The goal was no longer Antarctica. It was 28 lives. This change may sound simple, but it was everything. A weaker man might have dwelled on the lost mission, lost glory, lost place in history. Shackleton could not afford that. The ship was dying, and every face around him was now, from that moment on. He was no longer attempting to cross a continent. He was trying to bring his men home. When the ship was finally lost, the crew still had breath in their bodies, but the meaning of their journey changed forever. They stood upon the ice, no ship beneath them, yet losing the ship did not mean they had reached the bottom of their disaster. The men moved onto the ice, but the ice was not land. It had no roots, no mercy, no promise to stay beneath their feet. It cracked in the night, shifted under pressure, and drifted slowly across the sea. Their camp was not a home. It was a pause in danger. Every decision became smaller, harder, more painful. What could they carry? What had to be left behind? Food mattered more than comfort. Ropes mattered more than memories. A tool could mean life. A keepsake could become weight. Some men had to let go of things that once connected them to home. A book, a photograph, a small on the ice. Even memory had to be measured against survival. This is one of the quiet cruelties of their story. They were not only fighting weather, they were forced to choose what parts of their old lives they could still afford to carry. The cold made every decision harder. Hunger stretched every hour longer. A tired man could fall behind. A quiet man could become. Shackleton understood that the real danger was not just the ice. It was discouragement, the slow collapse of the mind when every day looked the same and every direction appeared empty. So he made survival feel practical. Move this, carry that, save the boats, protect the food, keep the group together. He did not ask the men to believe in a distant miracle, but offered something smaller and more possible. This was not courage that looked beautiful from afar. It was rough, tired, ordinary courage, repeated again and again in a place where nothing felt certain. But the ice kept changing. Soon, even their frozen camp could not be trusted. Cracks grew dangerous. The sea opened in places where, if they stayed, the ice might break beneath them. If they left, they would face the ocean in small lifeboats. The men stepped away from the broken certainty of the ice, placing their lives into boats that looked far too small for the sea ahead. The lifeboats, once emergency equipment, were now there around them. The ocean rose and fell with a cold, violent rhythm, as if the world itself were breathing against them. There was no deck to walk on, no cabin to hide inside, no strong ship between their bodies and the water. They were exposed to everything. Wind cut through their clothes. Salt water soaked them again and again. Hunger and thirst made time feel slower. Sleep came only in short, broken pieces, if it arrived at all. Each wave could lift them toward hope, then drop them back into fear. After days of suffering, they finally reached Elephant Island. For a moment, land must have felt like mercy. Solid ground beneath their feet seemed a person can understand why hope would rise in that moment. Land means shelter, stopping, and safety from the sea. But this story had one more cruel turn waiting. Elephant Island was not rescue. It was remote, frozen, almost completely outside the path of ordinary ships. No one knew they had survived the ocean only to arrive at a place where waiting could quietly destroy them. That was the terrible truth Shackleton had to face. Staying together meant slowly running out of chances. Leaving meant risking another impossible journey, so he chose the only path that still carried most of the men would remain on Elephant Island. Shackleton would take a few others in the James Caird and try to reach South Georgia, far across one of the most dangerous seas on Earth. Before he left, he gave the men something no map could guarantee, a promise. Then the small boat moved away, leaving 22 men on a frozen island, watching their last hope disappear into the Southern Ocean. From that moment, the story divided into two kinds of suffering: the men who waited and the men who sailed into the unknown. The James Caird was small, almost painful. It carried Shackleton and a handful of men through waters that seemed too violent for any open boat to survive. Waves rose like moving walls. Wind tore across the sea. Cold entered their clothes, their hands, and their faces. Still, they had to keep going. There was no room for comfort, and almost no room for doubt. If they missed South Georgia, there might in that tiny boat. Navigation was a thin line between return and disappearance. After days that must have felt longer than ordinary time, they reached South Georgia. But even there, the story refused to become simple. They had landed on the wrong side of the island. The people who could help were still beyond mountains, ice. It is hard to believe that after the crushed ship, the drifting ice, the lifeboats, and the open sea, one more impossible barrier stood in front of them. But that is why this story stays in the mind. Survival did not arrive all at once. It came in pieces, each one earned by men. Shackleton and his companions crossed the island on foot, navigating through cold, dangerous ground toward the sound of human life. Finally, after so much emptiness, they reached a whaling station. There were voices, buildings, warmth, and other people, but Shackleton was not finished. Reaching help was not the same as keeping his promise. Far away, 22 men were still on Elephant Island, watching the horizon and wondering if the small boat had survived. Shackleton tried to return. Weather and ice stopped him more than once. At last, a rescue ship reached Elephant Island. Imagine the men seeing it appear across the cold water. Not a dream, not a memory, a real ship. And on it was the man who had said he would come back. Shackleton looked toward the shore and counted the men. 22. Every one of them alive. Not one man was lost in Antarctica. That fact alone felt almost impossible. The promise had survived the ice, the ocean, the waiting, and the fear. The endurance was gone. The mission had failed, but the men were still there. And that is why Shackleton's story feels larger than a failed expedition. He did not bring home the victory he had dreamed of. He did not bring home the endurance. He did not cross Antarctica and return as the conqueror he once hoped to become. But perhaps history remembers him for something quieter. When the dream broke apart, he did not let the people around him break with it. The name endurance no longer belonged only to a ship. It became the word for what remained inside these men when the map, the plan, and the future all disappeared. In the end, Shackleton's greatest victory was not reaching the far side of Antarctica. It was bringing